You've entered Noctipawz, where fear whispers and sleep dares not linger. Here, we gather shadows, one story at a time, pulled from the darkest corners of Reddit. True or not, that's for you to decide. So lay back, close your eyes, and listen carefully. Because in the silence between each word, something might be listening too. Story 1. My mom used to hide under my bed at night. I was born in 2000, grew up in a small town in Northeast Ohio. We had one of those little ranch-style houses, all on one floor, 3 bedrooms. It was just me and my mom for most of my life. My dad left when I was a baby. She was a good mom, from what I remember. We didn't have much money, but she made sure I always had what I needed. She worked as a waitress at a restaurant in the center of town. Always tired, but always kind. We'd watch movies together at night. She'd tuck me in, kiss my forehead, and tell me she loved me. I felt safe. Except at bedtime. I must have been about 6 or 7 the first time I noticed it. One night after she tucked me in, I heard the floor creak after she turned off the light. Not out in the hall, right by my bed. I remember freezing, listening. Then I heard the sound of her breathing. Slow, heavy, right underneath me. I leaned over the edge and whispered, "Mom?" She didn't answer. Just this soft little giggle. Not mean, not playful, just weird. I called for her louder. After a few seconds, she crawled out from under the bed like it was the most normal thing in the world. Smiled at me and said, "Go to sleep, sweetheart. Mommy's here." Then she left the room. The next night, same thing. I heard her crawl under right after lights out. The soft thud of her knees and hands against the floorboards, the shift of the mattress as she settled in. Then the breathing. I was too little to really question it. I thought maybe it was just a game she liked to play. But the older I got, the more I realized it wasn't a game. It became a routine. She'd tuck me in like normal, turn off the light, and then she'd get under the bed. Every single night. And then she started doing little things. She would tap on the wood under my mattress in these odd rhythms. 3 taps, then 2, then 4. Sometimes it sounded almost like a song, other times like random patterns. If I moved or sat up, she'd stop until I lay back down. A couple times, I caught her peeking out from the foot of the bed. I'd feel eyes on me and look down, and there she was. Her face just visible in the dark, one eye glinting in the faint light from the hall. No expression, just watching. I stopped sleeping well. I'd lie stiff under the covers, too afraid to move or call for her. If I tried to leave the bed, she'd grab my ankle. Not hard, just enough to stop me. Then she'd giggle again, that same soft, weird giggle. I never told anyone. How do you explain something like that when you're a kid? I figured no one would believe me. It wasn't every night that something scary happened. Some nights, she'd just lie there quietly. I'd hear her whispering to herself sometimes. Words I couldn't make out, soft and steady, like she was talking to someone I couldn't hear. This went on for years. During the day, she was totally normal. Made my lunch, helped with homework, joked with me, hugged me. I remember trying to work up the courage to ask her about it once when I was around 10. I said something dumb, like, "Mom, why do you sleep under my bed?" She just blinked at me and smiled. "Oh, buddy, I don't do that. You must be having silly dreams." But that night, she was there again, and the tapping was louder. By the time I was 9 or 10, I stopped looking under the bed. I started sleeping on the couch when I could get away with it. Eventually, when I turned 11, she told me I was old enough to have a lock on my door. She never came back into my room. I don't know why she did it. I don't know what changed. She passed away when I was 23. Cancer. In her last weeks, she was confused a lot of the time, drifting in and out. But one night, when I was sitting by her bed, she grabbed my wrist and said very clearly, "I kept you safe, you know. You were never alone at night." I still don't understand what she meant. Story 2. I saw what they were loading into the van. Now I never sleep at roadside motels. I should have trusted my gut when I pulled into the Sunset Motor Lodge at 2 a.m. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting sickly pink shadows across the cracked asphalt. But I'd been driving for 18 hours straight, and my eyelids felt like sandpaper. I needed sleep more than I needed standards. The clerk behind the bulletproof glass looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were bloodshot, darting constantly toward the parking lot. Room 12? He mumbled, sliding the key through the slot without making eye contact. Cash only. No questions. I should have asked questions. Room 12 sat at the far end of the L-shaped building, isolated from the other units. The door stuck when I tried to open it, groaning like it hadn't been used in months. Inside, the carpet squelched under my feet with each step. The smell hit me immediately, bleach mixed with something metallic and wrong. I set my bag down and noticed the stains on the bedspread. Dark, irregular patches that looked hastily scrubbed. The bathroom mirror had a spider web crack running through it, and when I turned on the tap, the water ran rust-colored for 30 seconds before clearing. But exhaustion won over disgust. I collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, too tired to care about the questionable hygiene. I woke to voices outside my window. Low, urgent whispers punctuated by the sound of something heavy being dragged across gravel. Through the thin curtains, I could see two figures by a white van, loading what looked like rolled carpets into the back. My blood turned to ice when I realized one of the carpets had a hand hanging from it. I held my breath, not daring to move. The digital clock glowed at 3:47 a.m. One of the men was the desk clerk. The other wore a stained apron and kept checking his watch nervously. "This is the last one," the clerk whispered. "Then we clean everything and act normal when the morning shift arrives." "What about the guest in 12? Apron man asked. The clerk's laugh made my skin crawl. "Same as always. Checkout time is 11 a.m. sharp." They finished loading and drove away, leaving me alone with a terrible understanding of what this place really was. I wasn't a guest, I was next on their schedule. I grabbed my keys with shaking hands and crept toward the door. The parking lot was empty except for my car, which suddenly seemed impossibly far away. Every shadow could hide someone waiting. The door handle turned silently. I stepped outside, wincing at every footstep on the gravel. Halfway to my car, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. Going somewhere. I spun around. The desk clerk stood 20 feet away, no longer looking tired. He held something in his hand that glinted in the streetlight. "Checkout isn't until 11, he said, taking a step closer. "House rules." I ran. My feet pounded against the asphalt as I sprinted toward my car. Behind me, I could hear him giving chase, his heavy breathing getting closer. My hands fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before finally getting the door open. The engine turned over just as he reached my car. His fist slammed against the driver's side window as I threw it in reverse. In my rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, watching until my taillights disappeared. I drove until sunrise, not stopping until I reached a busy truck stop 50 miles away. Only then did I call the police. They found the motel abandoned when they arrived. No clerk, no evidence, no trace of the white van. Just empty rooms and the lingering smell of bleach. The official report listed it as a possible hoax call. But I know what I saw. And I know that somewhere out there, the Sunset Motor Lodge is still open for business, waiting for the next exhausted traveler who needs a place to stay. I still check out of every hotel room at exactly 10:59 a.m. Story 3. I slept at my friend's house, and we weren't allowed to leave the bedroom after 9 p.m. I soon found out why. We had been friends for 13 years, and in those years I had not once slept at his house. So why the sudden invite? I asked. I settled the duffel on my shoulder, and he held the door. "My parents are going out," he said, and the words came out of him in a rush. "Figured it's about time you saw my humble abode." The house was not a humble abode. It was a great white clapboard house that stood on the land as if it had been there forever and the town had grown around it. Old oaks stood guard over the grounds, and their shadows fell across the yard. Inside the house there was a smell of old wood and polish, and something more besides, a smell like turned earth after a rain. His mother was a woman built of small bones, and she carried a frantic smile that did not touch her eyes. She moved about the dim rooms with a nervous energy, asking of drinks and of snacks. His father sat in a leather chair, and he did not speak. He was a large man whose eyes were dark and still, and they followed us as we passed. I heard his mother whisper words to him, urgent and low, but I could not make them out. At 7 o'clock his parents left. "So, what's the plan?" I asked. I dropped my bag on the floor of his room. The room was a small island of the ordinary in that house, with its posters and its rumpled bed and the console set before the television. It was the only place that did not feel as if it belonged to the dead. "Pizza, video games, the usual," Leo said. He knelt and woke the machine. He moved with a forced calm, but I saw the cording in his neck. We ate the pizza and played the games, and for a time I did not think of the house or of the silence that lay coiled in its other rooms. For a time it was only the two of us and the sounds from the screen. Then near to 9 he paused the game. "Hey man," he said. He would not look at me, but worked the controller in his hands. "There's just one weird rule my parents have." "Weird rule?" "Yeah." He raised his head and his eyes were serious as a stone. "After 9 p.m., we have to be in here. In the bedroom. And we can't leave. Not for anything. Not for the bathroom. Not for a drink. Nothing. The door stays closed until sunrise." I stared at his face and looked for the jest that was not there. "You're kidding, right? What if I have to pee?" "Pee now," he said. His voice was flat. He gestured with his chin to an empty bottle on his desk. "And after 9, you use that." The laugh I had in my throat died there. "Dude, that's insane." "What?" He shrugged his shoulders, but the motion was counterfeit. "They're just super weird about security. Old house, you know. They think it's drafty." "Drafty?" I knew he was lying, I just didn't know why. Downstairs a clock began to chime the hour, and his head snapped toward the door. Bong, bong, bong. He was on his feet before the 9th bell had sounded its note. He crossed the room and closed the door. He slid a heavy bolt of steel into its housing, and the sound it made was final. "There," he said. A sweat had bloomed on his brow, and he breathed out the word. "We're good." "Leo, what the hell is going on?" I demanded. "Nothing, man. Just a weird rule," he said. He would not look at the door. He turned up the sound of the game until it was a roar in that small room. But I did not see the game. I saw only the bolted door, and I felt a coldness take root in my gut. The house was quiet again, but it was not the same quiet. This was a listening quiet. A waiting quiet, and in the dark heart of that house something waited, and we were locked in that room and waiting with it. An hour passed, and there was no sound from the house. The fear went out of Leo slowly, and he played the game with a feigned calm that did not sit right on him. We played on in that silence, and a vexation grew in me at the foolishness of it all. "You really need to tell your parents this is a certifiable way to raise a serial killer," I said. He gave back a fake smile. "Tell me about it." Then came a sound from the rooms below. It was a soft and measured thumping on the boards of the main hall. "What's that?" I whispered. Leo played on. He stared at the screen, and his fingers worked the buttons as if he did not hear. "It's nothing. House settling." "That's not the house settling, Leo." The sound ceased. In the quiet, I could hear the blood in my own ears. Then there came a new sound, which was a dragging sound, a scraping of some great weight across the wood floor beneath us, as of a heavy thing with broken feet. I muted the television. "Okay, that's definitely not the house," I said. Leo set the controller down upon the carpet. His face was pale in the shifting light of the screen. "Just ignore it, Liam. Please. It goes away if you ignore it." "What? What is it? What goes away?" Before he could answer, it spoke. The voice came from the hallway, faint at first, on the other side of our door. "Leo? Honey." I did not move. The voice was his mother's voice. "Leo, sweetheart, your father and I came home early. I brought you boys some warm cookies. Open the door." I looked to Leo and saw a boy cast in tallow. He stared at the door as if it were the gate of hell itself, and he raised a trembling finger to his lips and shook his head. "Leo, that's your mom," I whispered. "Don't be silly, sweetie, we're inside," the voice said. It was just outside the door now. "I just baked your favorites. Chocolate chip. They're getting cold." The scraping from below had stopped. There was only the sweet persuasion of that voice in the silent house. But the voice was wrong. There was a terrible perfection in its sound, like a memory of a voice and not the voice itself. Then came the knocking. It was a soft and wet sound on the far side of the door, as if a piece of meat were striking the wood. "Leo? Liam? Are you boys all right in there? You're being awfully quiet." "Leo," I mouthed, but no sound came. He sat upon the floor like a man made of stone, his eyes wide with a plea that had no words. He looked like something trapped. The knob of the door turned, once to the left and once to the right. Then it began to rattle in its fitting with a growing violence. "Boys, this isn't funny," the voice said. The sweetness broke in it then, and it was replaced with a hard and ragged edge. "Open the door." A great blow struck the door, and the frame of it groaned in the wall. I scrambled away from it on my hands and feet until my back was against the far wall of the room. The voice changed. It spoke again, and the voice was a ruin, a low and guttural thing that gurgled in its throat. "I know you in there." The wet tapping began again, faster now and frantic. With it came a thin and keening whine, a sound like wind through a crack in the world. And from the dark gap beneath the door a black and viscous fluid began to seep into the room. It was thick as oil, and it carried the smell of the grave, of wet soil and of things that rot in the earth. Leo moved. He crawled to the bed and pulled the blankets over him and became a small and shuddering shape in the dim room. He had gone into his own darkness. On the other side of the door the thing fell silent. I knew it was not gone. I knew that in my bones. It was there in the darkness beyond the door, and it was waiting. I kept my back to the far wall, and I watched the door. My breath was a small and panicked thing in my throat. On the bed Leo was a trembling knot of blankets and fear. For me this was a night's journey into that darkness. For him it was the place he lived. A fool's curiosity which has been my ruin more than once warred with the terror. A need to see the shape of the thing that hunted us. A dreadful truth was better than not knowing. I went forward on my stockinged feet, and the old boards did not whisper. "Liam, no," came a voice from the bed, muffled by the cloth. Don't look." But I would look. I knelt upon the floor, and the reek of the grave was stronger. I lowered my head to the cold brass of the keyhole. At first there was only the dim hall and the moonlight that fell in a pale blade from the window at its end. Then it stepped into the narrow view. It was not a man, nor was it a beast. It was a thing that was built of sticks and of shadow, impossibly tall and thin. Its limbs were the limbs of a winter tree, and its body was a gyre of dust and night that had no true form. It wore his mother's floral apron, the cloth stretched over a hollow space where a chest should be. It wore his father's hunting cap set upon a head that was only a clod of moving dark. It had no face, only a void. In one of its twig-like hands it held a picture I had seen on the wall, a portrait of the family. It held this picture before the void where its face should be, and it wore the smile of Leo's mother for its own. From its body, it put forth a long and blackened twig of an arm, and it tapped upon the door. Thump, thump, thump. I threw myself back from the door and clapped a hand to my mouth to keep the gorge from rising. My mind could not hold the shape of what I had seen. This was no creature that had entered the house. This was the house itself, a parasite that wore the stolen keepsakes of the dead or the soon-to-be dead for its raiment. From the door a new voice whispered, and the blood in me went to ice. "Liam, why are you hiding in there? Your mother is so worried about you." It was my own mother's voice. Perfect. The voice she used when I was a child and sick with fever, the call to supper from a life I would not see again. A wave of homesickness and of horror washed over me, for I wanted to be home, and I was not. And the thing in the hall gave a low chuckle that was the sound of dry leaves scuttling on a stone walk. It knew it had found the part of me that was soft. "Let me in, Liam," my mother's voice whispered, a sound of love and of poison. "I've come to take you home." I fell back to the wall and slid to the floor, and I felt the heat of shame in my thighs where my body had betrayed me. I looked at the trembling shape on the bed. The bottle he had offered. It had not been a joke. It had not been a rule, but a kindness. A tool for survival, for he knew. He knew all of it. The scraping began upon the door itself. A slow and patient sound, as of a claw being sharpened upon the wood. All the while it whispered my name in the voice of my mother, and it promised me an end to all this if I would but unlatch the door. The hours passed in that room, and the thing outside did not cease its siege. It spoke in the voices of the living and of those I could not know, a gallery of ghosts at the door. It offered warmth and food. It promised an end to the long night. And all the while it scraped at the wood with a patience that was a madness to hear. The fear had burned away in me and left a hard and bitter anger. I was angry at the thing in the hall and at the people who had built for it a cage and called it a home. And I was angry at the boy who hid in his blankets and would not speak. Hours passed. "Leo," I said. My voice was a dry croak in my throat. "Leo, wake up." A shape stirred in the bed. He looked out from the pale fortress of his sheets, and his eyes were raw with fear. "Is it gone?" he whispered. "No, it's not gone," I said. "I need to know what this is. Now. No more lies. What is that thing?" He flinched from the sound of my voice. He sat up in the bed and hugged his knees to his chest and would not look at me. "I don't know what it is," he mumbled to the door. "We just call it the Nightman. It's always been here, as long as my family has." The story came out of him then, a broken telling in the dark. His great-great-grandfather had built this house upon unhallowed ground. And from the first night, there was a wrongness in the wood and in the walls. A bargain had been struck in that time, an unspoken covenant with the darkness. The family would have the house by the light of day, but from 9 until the dawn the house was given over to that other. "It gets lonely," Leo whispered. A tear cut a clean path through his face. "It likes to play. It mimics people. It uses things it finds to try and make a body for itself. The apron, the hat, the picture. But it's getting bolder," he said, and his voice trembled in the small room. "It used to just make noise. Now it tries to get in. The rules were enough before. Stay in your room. Don't look. Don't listen. But now it wants more." He finally met my eyes, and I saw in them a guilt as deep and as cold as a well. It wants someone new. A cold truth settled in my soul, and it wounded me. The sudden invite. The fear in his parents' eyes. The heavy bolt on the door. You brought me here for it." "No, I didn't want to." The boy's voice broke. "My parents, they said it was getting too strong. That it wouldn't be satisfied with just them anymore. They said if it had someone new, someone not from the family, maybe it would be satisfied. Maybe it would leave us alone for a while." He had led me here as a lamb to the altar. His parents had not gone out. They were in this house, in their own locked room, and they were listening. They were praying that the beast in the hall would choose me. And then the scraping stopped. The whispers died. The house fell into a quiet, so profound it was like the earth had stopped its turning. "What's happening?" I breathed. Leo's eyes grew wide. From the floor below, a new sound came. The sound of feet on the stairs. Heavy. A footfall. And the dragging of a dead weight. Thump. Drag. Thump. Drag. It was not trying to trick us. The game was done. The footsteps ceased outside our door. The silence held for a count of 3. Then a crack like thunder sounded as a great force struck the door. The wood splintered and the deadbolt shrieked in its housing. Crack. A web of breaks spidered from the lock. A fine dust of ruined wood fell to the floor. "It's never done this before," Leo whimpered. He crawled away toward the dark corner of the room. "It's never tried to break the door down." Crack. Bang. The deadbolt was torn from the frame like a tooth from a jaw. The door swung inward on its hinges with a sad and final groan. And in the blackness of the hall, I saw it. There was no void. It had filled itself. Its body was a terrible congress of things stolen from the house. Floorboards for shins and rusted pipes for arms. Its torso a twisted cage of stair banisters, and within that cage I saw my own duffel bag, and it pulsed like some dark and foreign heart. Its head was the grandfather clock from the hall. It leaned upon its neck of twisted wood, and the pendulum swung behind the glass face like a wild and frantic eye. From the clock a voice came, not one voice but all of them, a discordant chorus speaking as one. "Time is up." The door swung open on its ruined hinges, and the thing assembled from the house's bones stepped into the room. Its coming was a grinding of parts, a clicking of old wood and metal, and the air filled with the smell of sawdust and the deep earth of the grave. Leo cried out, a sound of pure terror that was lost in the noise of the thing's advance. A hot and primal fear seized me, not of a predator, but of a thing that was wrong in the world. I took up a glass trophy from the desk, and I threw it with all the strength that I had. It struck the face of the grandfather clock, and the glass shattered in a spray of bright shards. The thing reeled back. It made a sound like all the clocks in the world striking some final and calamitous hour at once. It gave us a moment. The window! I screamed. I grabbed Leo by his arm and dragged him, for he was a thing of stone. My fingers were slick with sweat, and they slipped upon the window latch. It would not give. It had been painted into its frame. The thing righted itself. The broken glass of its face caught the moonlight in 1,000 crazed points of light. It came for us, its arm of rusted pipe raised up to strike. The bed! Help me with the bed! I yelled. Adrenaline found him at last, and he moved. We set our shoulders to the heavy oak bedstead and turned it onto its side and made of it a poor and flimsy barricade. The creature stumbled into the mattress, and its feet, made of chair legs and other things, became tangled in the sheets. It roared, and it began to tear the bed apart with its hands, ripping the guts of it out onto the floor. We were trapped in the corner of the room with the unyielding window at our backs. The sun, Leo gasped, and his eyes were wild. It's the only thing. It has to be inside before the sun comes up. I looked out into the night, and the sky was a deep and starless black. We did not have hours. The creature tore itself free of the ruined bed. It came on, slow now, for it knew that we were its own. It raised a hand made of silverware from the kitchen, the forks and the spoons bound together to make a shining and terrible claw. And then I saw a thing tucked behind his television. It was a high-powered flashlight. A last and desperate thought came to me. I lunged and took up the cold metal of the flashlight. The thing was upon me. I smelled the dust of its body, and I saw the brass pendulum swinging in its broken face. I found the switch, and a great pillar of white struck it full in its head. It shrieked a sound of pure agony. The light did not burn it, but seemed to unmake it from itself. The spoons of its hand clattered to the floor. A floorboard on its legs split and fell away. The light was a poison to the thing's very being. It shielded the ruin of its face with its pipe arm, and it stumbled into the shadows by the door. And in that room began the longest watch of my life. I held the light like a sword, and the beam of it was the only thing that held the creature at bay. Leo huddled behind me and cried out when it scuttled at the edges of the room. We were keepers of a light against a great and pressing dark, and the strength in my arm burned away, and the batteries that fueled our light would not last. The creature would lunge, and I would drive it back with the beam, and we would wait and listen to it breathing in the shadows. The hours passed this way, in a stalemate between the light and the dark. The beam of the light began to fail. It flickered. It's dying, I gasped. Just a little longer, Leo urged, his eyes fixed upon the window. Just a little longer. The creature knew. It gathered itself in the dark as the beam dimmed to a sad yellow glow, and with a final and triumphant roar, it charged. In that same moment, a pale gray line was drawn upon the black horizon. It was the first sign of dawn. The thing struck me, and the flashlight was knocked from my hand. I was on the floor, and the monster stood over me, its clock face bent low, and I saw my own face reflected in the arc of the swinging pendulum. Then a single and pure ray of the morning sun pierced the window and touched the creature's back. It froze. A profound stillness came over it. Then it began to come apart. The clock head crumbled to a fine dust. The pipe arms fell from its shoulders and clattered on the floorboards. The banisters of its chest unwound. The stolen silver and the splintered wood and my own duffel bag all collapsed into a heap of simple things. In moments, all that was left was this pile of refuse and a thin layer of gray dust that smelled of the grave. The sun streamed through the window and filled the ruined room with light. I lay upon the floor and gasped for breath. Leo wept against the wall, a sound of relief and of terror. We had lived. There were footsteps in the hall, not of a monster, but of a man. The door to his parents' room opened. A moment later they stood in our doorway. They did not look at the ruin of the room, nor at the pile of debris on the floor where the creature had been. They looked at me, and I saw on their faces not relief nor any gladness, but only a deep and bottomless disappointment. The horror was not ended. I knew then that the plan had failed. The sacrifice had not been made. The thing that was the house would be hungry when the sun fell again. I was the one who got away, and for this, they would never forgive me. Story 4. I refused to give a creepy hitchhiker a ride. Minutes later, my car broke down. When I recount this story at parties, I tell it like a joke. I play up the great, cosmic justice of it all, framing the moment my car came to a stop as a kind of cheesy punchline. In reality, the events of that night remain the most harrowing of my entire life. It was 2014, and I was a senior in high school. At the time, I lived in Central Texas, but my brother was in school in Colorado. Since he was graduating soon and I hadn't yet visited, I decided to drive out to him when our spring breaks aligned. The only issue was that I technically wasn't supposed to be driving. Believe it or not, despite being a dumbass 18-year-old who liked to drive fast, I'd never had a traffic violation, never even gotten a parking ticket. I did, unfortunately, get caught drinking with my buddies a week prior to the drive. My license was suspended for 30 days, but I didn't let that stop me. I was going to see my brother one way or another, so I left late in the day, chugged Red Bulls to stay alert, and stuck to the back roads as much as possible. It added a few hours to my trip, but it allowed me to avoid state troopers for the most part. By midnight, I felt like I was in the Australian outback. I had taken road trips through my state before, but this particular route was something else. Nothing but scrub brush and signs too weather-beaten to read. I was so busy thinking about how utterly isolated I was that I almost missed the orange traffic cone in the road, placed square atop a yellow center line. I reduced my speed, but I didn't stop. I was confident that there was no work being done on the road. I had checked the maps, and there would have been more signage. Since I knew there was no construction in the area, I found the placement of the cone a little odd. Of course, junk on the road isn't such a rarity, but the way it aligned perfectly with the meridian line felt intentional. A few miles later, my drive was again interrupted. My high beams reached far into the desolate night, providing enough visibility for me to see another oddity. There was something else in the road, this time in my lane. I squinted. Another traffic cone? It was tall enough, but not quite thin enough. I slowed down a little more. I remember thinking, that can't possibly be a person. I got a little closer. Lo and behold, it was. I veered into the other lane, but the person in the road mirrored my car, clearly trying to get me to stop. They threw one of their arms out as if welcoming the cold, metal embrace of my front bumper. I slammed on the brakes abruptly enough to give myself whiplash. Confusion and anger rose up in me as I turned my headlights down and got a better look at the person in front of me. I regretted stopping once I could see the man more clearly. At first glance, he seemed like a normal guy. He was tall and middle-aged, clad in blue jeans and a long, tan coat. He had no particularly distinct facial features, except for a set of blue eyes that somehow seemed too small for his face. He gave me a wide grin when he saw me stop. I guess he could have just been relieved, but I couldn't give him the benefit of the doubt due to what he was holding. Balled up in his hand was something small, furry, and bloody. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it kind of looked like a dead rat. I had no idea why he'd be holding such a thing, and it didn't really matter. All I knew was that there was something wrong with the guy, a suspicion only exacerbated by the fact that he still had one of his hands behind his back. Was he hiding something? A weapon? I took my foot off the brake. I might have been dumb enough to stop, but at least I wasn't dumb enough to stay. As I tried to maneuver around him, the man again moved in front of my car, but when he saw I wasn't going to stop, he took a step back. As he did so, he let his arms fall to his sides, and I saw what he'd been concealing behind his back, a large claw hammer. I sped off, not entirely believing what had just happened. There was a small chance that the guy genuinely needed help, but I sure wasn't going to stick around to figure that out. As I drove off, I looked in my rearview mirror. Before the darkness swallowed him, I saw the man starting to run after my car. For a second, the sight made me nervous, but then it just made me laugh. Did he actually think he was going to catch up? I watched him disappear from view with a smile on my face. Fucking idiot, I said to myself. Now here's the punchline. No sooner did the words leave my mouth than my car jolted forward with a sickening thud. I looked back at the road, but it was too late. There came several pops in quick succession, loud as gunshots. My dashboard lit up like a switchboard, warnings blinking uselessly as my tires chewed themselves to pieces beneath me. The car started to drag left, the steering wheel fighting me as a low, flapping sound rose up from the wheels. When I stopped the car, I gave myself a moment to catch my breath, then threw the door open and hopped out. Using the flashlight I kept in the glove box, I assessed the damage. All 4 tires were shredded, strips of rubber curling off like dead skin. I just stood there for a second, light shaking in my hand, unable to believe how fast everything had happened. I angled the beam back down the road, sweeping over cracked asphalt and weeds. 50 meters back, half hidden in the dark, was a spike strip. I hadn't seen the damn thing at all. Between where I'd encountered the man and where I'd hit the stinger, there was a slight hill. I couldn't see over the hill, couldn't see much of anything, but somehow I knew I was being pursued. The man with the hammer, who was probably the one behind the traffic cone and the spike trap, was making his way toward my car at that very moment. I had only put about a half-mile of distance between us, which meant I had maybe 5 minutes tops to figure out what to do. I checked my phone, and, as luck would have it, I had no reception. My first thought was to get back in the car and lock the doors, but what good would that do me against a hammer-wielding maniac? I could run out into the fields on either side of the road, but there was really nowhere to hide out there, and I was loath to isolate myself even further from help. My plan, if it could even be called that, was to run. First, I turned on my headlights to alert passing cars. Then I grabbed my phone, wallet, keys, and flashlight out of the car and mentally prepared for a very long jog. Thankfully, I was a cross-country runner in high school, and I had good endurance. While I knew I couldn't run all the way to the next town, I knew that another car had to show up eventually. I'd flag them down and ask for help, or at the very least I'd probably stumble into an area with reception and call the police. I shut and locked my poor, crippled car, then took a glance behind me. He was cresting the hill, less than a quarter-mile out. Something about the bend in the road, coupled with the low lighting, made his long, loping stride seem unnatural. He seemed like he was floating. I was already freaked out, but seeing that made me feel like I was being chased by something not entirely of this world. I turned and ran. I fought the urge to sprint, knowing I couldn't afford to wear myself out right away. Once a minute, I glanced behind me. My flashlight beam wasn't powerful enough to reach him, but I could still see the faint silhouette of the man against the cloudless, starry sky. He was small on the horizon, but he was there nonetheless. And worse, he was gaining on me. 5 minutes turned to 10, and I couldn't believe that he hadn't given up already. I told myself he couldn't keep up the pace, and yet every time I turned around, he was a little closer than before. At some point, I tried shouting out, tried asking what he wanted, but of course there was no answer. Soon I was wiping sweat from my brow and thanking God that I'd been wearing athletic shoes on my drive. As I looked over my shoulder for a routine check-in, I saw the shimmer of headlights. There was a pickup truck ambling toward me. I bolted straight into the middle of the road, waving my arms around and shouting for help. For a second, the truck slowed, but then it eased around me and kept right on going. No windows rolling down, no honk. The bastard didn't even stop long enough to see what my deal was. I shouted something at the shrinking, red tail lights, but it didn't matter. My salvation had left me in the dust. I stood there long enough to realize that standing still was a bad idea, and then I pushed down my rage and disbelief. I looked behind me once again, and strangely, that time, I didn't see anyone. Maybe my pursuer had fallen behind, or maybe he had given up entirely. Or, hell, maybe I'd hallucinated the entire thing and abandoned my car in the middle of nowhere for no reason. In any case, I kept moving, periodically checking my phone. I guess I was due for some luck that night, because after another half-mile, I saw a car on the side of the road, a red Dodge Charger. It was turned off and dark inside, but the tires were perfectly intact. There was no visible damage on the car, certainly no evidence of hitting a stinger, and that fact made me wonder if it belonged to my pursuer. I made my way to the car. There was no person inside, but there were still keys in the ignition. Usually, this is where I end my story. Dodge Ex Machina to the rescue. I settled into the driver's seat and breathed an enormous sigh of relief when a turn of the keys brought the engine roaring to life. By some miracle, the car was drivable, and it had enough gas to take me to the next town. Finally confident that I would survive the ordeal, I looked out the passenger side window and saw something that made my heart stop. Yards away from my car and rapidly closing the distance was the man. He hadn't given up at all. He'd merely started running in an arc through the fields, avoiding the road that I'd watched so diligently and so uselessly. He had banked on me losing sight of him so he could catch me off guard, and it had almost worked. By the time I slammed my foot on the gas, he practically had his fingers on the handle. I caught one last glimpse of him in the side mirror as the Charger tore off, a pale, grinning blur closing in faster than should have been possible. After that, I drove the car straight to the police station in the next town. At dawn, when they took me back to recover my own vehicle, every single window had been shattered. Not simply cracked, but obliterated. Nothing had been stolen from my car, which somehow made everything worse. As far as I know, they never found the man with the hammer. Here's the part one generally omit from my little story. When I, exhausted and nearing my limit, finally made it to the Charger, the driver's side door was open. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam across the interior. The cabin was a wreck. Blood was smeared over the wheel, gear shift, and driver's seat, like some injured creature had been thrashing around. The windshield was cracked from the inside. From the open door trailed a dark streak through the gravel and weeds, a crushed path, mottled with red, where something heavy had been dragged. I let my beam follow the indentation until it caught on something still and misshapen. There was a man lying there on his back, some poor bastard who, most likely, had offered a ride to a downtrodden traveler. His mouth hung open as if he'd died while trying to speak. His skull had been bashed in. Part of it was just gone, leaving a cave above his eyes where something heavy had landed over and over again. The white of his skull shone moon-like under my light. That matted clump in the hitchhiker's hand wasn't roadkill. It was a whole goddamn scalp. Story 5. My brother is downstairs watching TV, but we buried him a week ago. It had been 10 years since I was last home, since I last walked through the large blue door with the welcome mat out front. They tried to resell the house after we left. Well, forced out would be more accurate. They never could sell the house. It was kind of hard to sell a house with the stigma of a suicide attached to it. For 10 years, I've been haunted by that day. The day my father took his own life. The day my mother lost her mind. The day my brother came back from the dead. My brother, Max, had disappeared during the last few days of his camping trip. He went to a camp called Camp Manatory, right outside of that freaky town called Sleepy Falls. It was one of those small towns that had existed since colonial times, but wasn't on any map, and the only way you could find it is if you'd been there before or someone who'd been there before showed you the way. When we got word that Max went missing, we drove the 4 hours to Camp Manatory to assist in the search. My dad stayed silent the whole trip, and so did I. The silence in the car was broken by my mother's occasional sobs and repeating to herself, "My baby boy, we'll find you." When we reached the town of Sleepy Falls, we cut through the market district, since it was the fastest route to the camp. Shopkeepers and shoppers alike stepped out of their stores and just stared at us as we drove by. No smiles, no waves, they just stared. I remember when we visited this place years ago. I was just a kid, but something about this town rubbed me the wrong way. When we arrived at the camp, we were greeted by a tall, skinny man with dark hair cut into a bowl cut and dark-rimmed glasses. "Hello, my name is Simon. I'm one of the counselors here. You must be the Turners," the skinny man said, extending his hand out to my father. "Grant, this is my wife, Nicole, and my daughter, Riley," my dad answered as he firmly shook Simon's hand. Simon looked at my mother and me and then back to my father. "We're doing all we can to look for Max. We have the local sheriff and his 2 deputies helping in the search," he said. "That's it? Just the sheriff and his 2 lackeys? Where's the police? The FBI?" I demanded. "This is my brother we're talking about." "Riley, be silent," my father yelled. I shut up quickly. My father wasn't a loud man. He got angry and raised his voice hardly ever, so when he did, it was always a surprise. The town would prefer to keep this a localized event for now. Besides, we also have all of the counselors and volunteer campers assisting in the search. Simon smiled. We'll help too, my father said. My mother and I nodded in agreement. The search lasted all through the night and into the early morning. We would take shifts during the search. One party would go through the woods to search, while the other stayed at camp and rested until the groups switched. I was a part of the night search along with my dad and Simon. We never found anything during our search. No clothing, no blood, no answers to our calls. When we returned to camp to switch parties, the sun was barely peeking through the trees. Coffee? Simon asked, holding 2 coffee cups and offering one of them to me. Sure, thanks, I answered, taking the blue cup from his hand. He looked at me for a moment, attempting to read me. Maybe he was trying to find words to say to me. Can I help you with something? I asked. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to stare. He answered. No, I'm sorry. That was rude of me. I sighed. Simon was maybe a year or 2 older than me. I'm sure he's worried about Max too, having spent the last couple of months with him. Maybe he had a younger brother also and felt empathetic. Do you travel here to volunteer at the camp every year? I asked, trying to make small talk. Oh, actually, I'm a local. I live in town with my uncle. He answered. Oh, I see. Hey, is the town always this weird when people travel through it? I asked. Weird? Oh, well, we don't get a lot of outsiders here, so whenever someone travels through, people get curious. He laughed. Curious? Those looks we got were not the looks of curiosity. They were the look that said, you don't belong here. So, if you're a native to the area, you should know these woods pretty well, huh? I suggested. Not really. The woods always change after summer. He said. What do you mean by that? I asked. He looked back at me with panic written all over his face. Oh, it's just a saying we have around here. Like when the seasons change, so do the trees. And you know every tree looks the same. He laughed nervously. Before I could pry further, one of the sheriff's deputies came running back into camp. We found something, he said out of breath. My dad immediately jumped out of his chair. He wobbled for a moment from exhaustion, but immediately began walking towards the deputy. Show me, he demanded. The deputy nodded in agreement and took my dad into the forest. They found my brother. He was dead. Exposure was ruled the cause of death. They found his body naked, lying face down in a creek. They explained this as a phenomenon that happens during events of hypothermia. His back was torn open, exposing his spine, and some of his organs were missing. They explained this with animal predation. The drive home was quiet, quieter than the drive there. My mother didn't cry. She was still in shock. I tried to hold everything in. I wanted to cry, I wanted to throw up, and I wanted to die. I didn't want to feel this kind of pain. My father, as per usual, didn't say a word, quiet and stoic as always. The funeral was a few weeks later, open casket. The mortuary did a good job making Max look as close to alive as he could be. I had hoped he would just hop up and tell us it was all an elaborate prank. But he never jumped up, never smiled, and never laughed. I missed his laugh. Hey, Riley. I'm sorry for your loss. A short, chubby kid with a crew cut said to me. Oh, hey, Benny. I didn't recognize you. You got a haircut? I asked. Yeah, my mom said my hair wasn't an appropriate length for a funeral. He said, brushing his hand against his short hair. I fucked up. Benny began to cry. If I didn't get summer school, I could have been there with Max. I could have watched his back, made sure he stayed safe. He sobbed. I wrapped my arms around him and pulled him in close to comfort him. I patted his back to give him a bit of security. As I did, I could feel something poke against my leg. You, Benny, what the fuck? I asked as I pushed him away. Sorry. I've never been hugged by a girl before. Not one that wasn't my mom. He said, wiping away his tears. It's okay. I said. When we returned home, my dad locked himself in the den, and my mom just began cooking all of Max's favorite dishes and cleaning the kitchen over and over again. A week had passed. My dad never came out of the den, took his meals in there, and only ever came out to go to the bathroom and occasionally shower. My mom slept in Max's room, on his bed, and said it still smelled like him. I could hear her cries at night, muffled in his pillow and by my wall. There were nights when I wanted to sneak out, but I could never bring myself to leave. One morning, I was up in my room just listening to music, staring at the posters that littered my ceiling. I heard a loud pop downstairs. I immediately jumped up and ran out the door and down the stairs. What the fuck happened? I screamed as I entered the kitchen. What I saw down there, I couldn't explain. It was my brother, or something that looked like my brother, being embraced by my mother. It looked like Max, but not right. His skin hung wrong on his body, like a sheet covering a coat rack. It wasn't Max, not the one we buried, but something trying to imitate him. What the fuck? I screamed as I turned around and ran back upstairs and slammed my bedroom door. I looked at my bed and saw the cordless phone lying on it. I immediately picked it up and called 911. I could hear a small click in between the rings. It was a sound I knew all too well when Max used to listen in on my conversations with my friends. It was listening. 911. What is your emergency? The operator asked. Hello? Please send help. I'm at 3232 West Holly Lane. I said desperately. What is happening there? The operator asked. It's my brother. He's downstairs with my mother. I think my father shot himself. I cried. Your father shot himself. Okay, we'll send a cruiser and an ambulance your way. The operator said. No, that's not it. My brother disappeared a month ago at summer camp. They found his body in the woods. We buried him last week. That thing downstairs is not my brother. I screamed. I couldn't help but break down and cry. Ma'am, can you repeat that? Is this a prank call? The operator asked on the line. Help, there's an intruder in my house. I'm in danger, and my mom is in danger. He shot my father. Help, I screamed as I hung up the phone, hoping they'd take me seriously. I had to escape somehow to save Mom. I thought to myself. That's when I heard a knock at my door. Riley, let me in. Let's watch sea cartoons together. The voice said on the other side of my door. I quickly, but quietly, began to open my window leading outside. Riley, Mom made pancakes. See, come on down. The voice continued. It sounded like Max, but not like Max. It sounded like someone trying to imitate Max's voice, his cadence, but not quite getting it. I began the climb down. I'd made this climb dozens of times before, but I was always able to take my time. I was about halfway down when I began to hear something slamming into my door upstairs. I heard my door cracking and splintering with each slam against it. I didn't have time to finish the climb. I had to jump the rest of the way. It was about another 10 feet down, but I didn't want to accidentally twist my ankle or something. I aimed for the bushes below. Landing was a bit rough, but the worst I got was some scratches from thorns and branches in the bushes. I couldn't go back through the front door to get Mom. I needed to arm myself. I had to go through the window in the study. It was a tight fit, but I pushed my way through. My dad sat in the chair, his mouth agape. A crown of bone and brains adorned the back of his head. His cherished 1911 was on the floor next to him. Scattered through the den were various plates of half-eaten food and a lot of crumpled-up paper. Upon further inspection of the notes, I realized they were suicide notes. My dad had been planning on ending his own life for days, and finally seeing that thing wearing my brother's face must have finally pushed him over the edge. I thought about grabbing the 1911, but I didn't fully know how to use it. The shotgun, on the other hand, that was in the now open gun cabinet, I was more intimate with. Dad taught me how to shoot it, always bruised my shoulder, but he said it was one of the best options for home defense. I loaded in 3 shells of buckshot into the tube, followed by 2 slugs and 1 in the chamber. I grabbed a handful of shells and put them in the front pocket of my flannel shirt I was wearing. I slowly opened the door that led out into the hallway, past my parents' room, past the kitchen. I saw my mom still on the ground, crying into the tile still. Mom, I whispered. You need to run. She didn't respond. She just stood up and brushed herself off. Oh, hi, Riley. I was about to make pancakes for your brother. Can you tell him to wash up? She smiled, her eyes blank with emotion. Fuck, I said to myself. I hurried up the stairs, pushed the butt of the shotgun against my shoulder, ready for the thing to pounce at the top of the stairs. It never came. I checked my room. The door had been broken down, but there was no sign of the thing. I checked my brother's room as well, just in case this thing had the courtesy of closing the door behind it. Nothing there either, just my brother's unmade bed, the way my mother had last left it. It was then I heard the TV downstairs turn on at an exceedingly high volume. I quickly turned around and headed back downstairs, past the kitchen, where I saw my mom still standing in the exact same spot, exactly with a whisk in her hand, stirring at air. I walked into the living room and saw the thing sitting on the couch watching cartoons. I raised the shotgun towards the back of what you'd call its head, readied my finger on the trigger. "Is it time for cartoons?" it said, almost perfectly imitating Max's voice. I hesitated for a moment. Its head spun around like an owl's, and it looked at me with its blackened eyes. It reminded me of a deer's eyes after you've killed it. It startled me and made my blood run cold. It was the first time seeing it up close. I was startled by its expression and fired the shotgun, clipping the top of its head with the slug. It shrieked at me as it jumped from the couch onto the ceiling and began crawling around like a spider. Its limbs gnarled like the branches of a tree, and its body twisted like a rag being wrung out. I aimed up at it as it began crawling over my head. This time I hit its center mass. Its body fell on top of me, pinning me to the ground. The shotgun was knocked out of my hands, out of reach. A black, sap-like fluid oozed out of its mouth and chest wound. It stank like that of rotting food and putrid water. The thing was heavy, like a tree had fallen on me. I pushed and crawled my way out from under it. I was almost out before it grabbed my ankle. Large, brambled fingers began splitting out from its hands, wrapping around my leg. I could see the top of its head where I had shot it earlier. It pulsated like an organ that had grain running through it similar to wood. It looked up at me as its face began to split open, revealing rows of bony teeth running down its vertical maw. I turned to see the shotgun behind me. I lay back to try and reach it, but could barely touch it. The creature's maw began to get wider as the tendrils wrapped up to my thigh, just below my shorts. I took a deep breath and pulled back further, throwing myself further back. My skin was ripping and peeling at my thigh where the creature grasped me. I grabbed the shotgun and pulled it towards me. I pumped the next shell into the chamber, spitting the empty one across the carpet. I raised it towards the face of this creature, and as I did, a flash of memories of Max hit me. I couldn't tell if these were my memories or the creature's doing in an attempt to catch me off guard. I didn't stop. I didn't blink. I pulled the trigger. The buckshot hit its exposed face point blank as it recoiled in pain, howling with a deafening scream. I pumped the next shell, ready to finish it off. It uncoiled its tendrils from my leg and crashed through the large living room window, escaping. A few moments later, I could hear sirens coming up our street. There was no explanation for the events that happened that day. The cops wouldn't have believed my story anyway. They chalked it up to being teenage hysteria due to a combination of my brother's death and my father's suicide. My mom never recovered and ended up in a home. I was supposed to graduate that year and start college the next. Instead, I got evaluated. They said I had PTSD and depression and that I was probably bipolar too. Said I was a potential danger to myself. Even so, I never told anyone what really happened. I didn't want to end up like where my mom was. I still visit her from time to time. She recognizes me, but always says the same thing. Tell your brother to go wash up for breakfast. So why am I here? Back at this house? This decrepit memory? A part of me hopes that it is here. But the other reason is because when the cops were coming back then, I hid the shotgun in a loose floorboard I had known about. I could get any firearm I needed for what I was about to do, but this one I have a personal history with. I don't know what that thing was that killed my brother and took his form. Years of research led me to various shapeshifters, skinwalkers, and legends like that. I do know that it came from the forest near Sleepy Falls, and that town always bothered me. I knew it was time to go back. The voices have quieted, but something still watches. If these stories clung to you, if one of them whispered a little too close, leave a trace in the comments, so we know you made it to the end. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell.